Good evening and welcome to the ViveEcosse podcast. I am one of your hosts, Graeme Spence, and tonight I'm joined by Allison and Graeme.
Hi Graeme, how are you?
Well, I woke up this morning. I've got to tell you, in fact, you're part of the reason I woke up this way this morning. I was lying in my bed and then I'm pretty sure my phone, you can actually see it's plugged in. I've had to plug in my phone tonight because the battery is that dead. It vibrated itself off the table in the room and basically smashed into the floor because it was going that mental with what was happening today. So that is how I am today. I woke up this morning to my phone basically falling off the table and to the news that the current First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeons, is about to become the former yesterday's woman, as it were, of Scotland, and she is out of the Scottish National. She is out as the leader of the Scottish National Party. So that is how I am today. How are you, Alison?
Yeah, I also kind of woke up to thinking how my day was going to pan out, and it went slightly differently. But I was actually supposed to have a work meeting at the time that this press conference was on from Nicola Sturgeon, and then my work meeting actually just got moved at the last minute. Completely nothing to do with me. So I actually got to sit and watch it and kind of start to unpack what was actually going on and what was likely to happen and try and pick up any of the kind of cues from it. So I think I've had a chance to kind of digest a lot of that as the day's gone on and go back and kind of check some bits and what have you. Thought there's a few interesting things to come out of it that we can hopefully go through today. But I think the main thing for me, as you say, a week's a long time in politics. We're now at a stage it's sometimes a matter of hours, days and hours. So from somebody who's had complete control over the party for 8 years and the country, as you say, tomorrow she will be, yesterday's politician. I know she's saying she's going to stay on as an MSP, but who knows when the next Hollywood election is going to be. Everything seems to be up in the air at the moment, which in a way, a lot of the stuff we've discussed is about this real stuck in the mud position that Scotland seems to have been in, that there's been a lack of movement. And, if you want a reaction, you need certain things to take place. You need to turn up the heat. You need a catalyst. We've talked about that a lot. What are the catalysts for change? You need to have a real concentration of effort, and we've discussed that with things like constitutional conventions, and also turn up the temperature a bit. But one of the key things I think I would really like to spend some time on in tonight's podcast is looking at what happens next and what Scotland learned from this, because at the end of the day, as we've said so many times, politicians, political parties are transient in the future of a nation, and I think we need to get perspective back on what does this mean for Scotland, what has Scotland learned, and what do we do next, and how do we take the learnings into something more robust. You discussed in the blog a few weeks ago, you kind of called it with there's a hole in the ship blog about, at some point for Nicola there was a tipping point, and that seems to have been reached, and now we need to ensure the next vessel is robust. And one of the key things for me in that is that the surface area is spread, that we never get into a position again that we've got such a single point of failure, potentially, because it's an easy target for your opposition. And it's also, people are human beings. There's a lot of focus on that today, about the kind of the personal aspect of being in a position like that and the toll it takes and stuff, whatever you may think of Nicola as an individual or as a leader, etc. So I think lots of lessons learned, and I think the politician, personality politics needs to be something we learn to move on from, because I think Scotland's got an opportunity to move away from the Americanised model that's seeped into Westminster politics and has has come up to Scotland as well. And particularly in the last 8 years, when there's a lot of, it's about the First Minister, it's about, I'm with Nicola, and, this kind of branding, which, regardless of what you think, is not good for her, and it's not good for the country. We need we need a breadth of talent, and I think that's where we need to learn to move on to.
I think as well, I mean, there's not much point in us spending too much time talking about Nicola Sturgeon. I don't think we're going to add anything to that other people necessarily don't know, or add anything that other people wouldn't necessarily pick up on. So we're left with, what we do best, which is ViveEcosse. As you said, we predicted a little while ago that Nicola Sturgeon would be departing, and certainly the ship of her leader would sink, and it did do. But that's not the only time we've called it. I mean, this has went on for a little while. On the 23rd of November, I'm pulling it up as we sit here, so on the 23rd of November we put out a blog, and it said, "Can Sturgeon save her premiership?" And it focused around whether or not, in the wake of the Supreme Court decision, Nicola Sturgeon, could maintain her premiership and could lead Scotland to independence and certainly lead her political party. And I think one of the things that we have to take from that is actually the answer to that was no, she couldn't.
Yep.
And we're in a rather unique situation where she tried and failed. And I think possibly she held on for the gender recognition reform, and that's probably one of the last things she wanted to see through the door, which I don't think is actually going to make it to the statute book. But, that was what happened. So a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago today actually, there's a hole in the ship, Nicola Sturgeon got to save it. And I don't think she had much latitude to survive that. So we ended up being right on that. And that leads us to today's blog, which we put out, which is what happens now. And this is where, we're a wee bit ahead again. And if you're a listener of the ViveEcosse podcast, or a watcher on YouTube of the ViveEcosse podcast, or an avid reader of the blog, you will always know the information before everyone else, because, quite frankly, we're always just that little bit ahead. Not that we're gloating today. I can see Alison smirking off in the distance as I'm saying we're always a little bit ahead. So, anyway, and I say that, I mean, we're not actually ahead. Like, the first I knew about it is my phone kind of fell off the table and I knew something had happened. But, so let's go through some facts, where I'm sure Alison's going to chip in after we get through them. But the first one, the leader of the SNP does not actually need to be an MSP. It can be any card-carrying member of the SNP that was a member before nominations opened, which was today. So if you were a member yesterday, you can apply to be the leader. The party leader will always be the Scottish Parliament.
The ballot. You need to retain your membership to the ballot.
Yeah, sorry, you can't. If you leave, that's you. You're bumped. You're done. So the party leader will always be the Scottish Parliamentary Group leader if they're an MSP. This is slightly different to Westminster, because the Parliamentary Group leader at Westminster doesn't necessarily have to be the party leader if they are in there. It's a separate process. So for the Scottish Parliament, the party leader is always the Parliamentary Group leader. If the deputy leader, so let's say an MP got elected party leader, it doesn't automatically mean they'll be group leader at Westminster, but what it does mean is the deputy leader, which is currently Keith Brown, would become the Scottish Parliament group leader. That doesn't, though, believe it or not, mean that he'd become the First Minister. And nor I've seen suggested that John Swinney would automatically become the First Minister. Oddly, although John Swinney does have the position of Deputy First Minister, it's not a constitutionally, well, there's not really a constitution in Scotland, but it's not a recognised position in a line of succession. So the DFM doesn't replace the FM, that's not a thing. Like, there has to be a vote of Parliament to choose a new FM. If you want to challenge to be leader, you must have 100 members that support you, and they must be spread over a minimum of 20 branches. So it's quite a significant thing to stop random people just causing challenge for challenge's sake. If there's only one candidate left in the selection, by the day ballot opens, there will be no election and there will be no vote. And I'm going to come back to that. all SNP members will be able to vote, and only if you're an SNP member as of like this morning when they opened the thing. So if you're gonna, you might if you join today get in, but as of tomorrow you're definitely not in the vote. Mind you, their IT is absolutely rubbish and their digital rubbish. So I mean, you're probably there's every possibility that.
Yeah, I'll just come in there, Graham, because this has come out from the National Secretary Lorna Flynn, and it says when nominations open, which is today on the 15th. So technically, any member who joined, anybody who joined today as a new member who wanted to be part of that election nomination, I would say would have quite a strong case, because it doesn't actually time bound it. It says, the date of the nomination rather than the kind of timestamp. So I think, there kind of needs to be a bit of clarity. So, and you have to stay a member, which is what I meant before, not the person.
Mind you, it's 10:30 now. By the time this goes out, it's definitely could be after midnight.
Yeah,
so you're too late.
There's a lot of chat on Twitter about it though, and I think it's, it's
a good point.
Yeah, and also the other thing Lorna Flynn put in her letter was that the NEC would decide the timetable, which is interesting because the timetable's already laid out, which I think you're going to come on to explain.
I mean, I'll come back to this because that's a good point, and I want to come back to that. But anyway, all SNP members, as of the nomination date, will vote using the STV voting system. It's a ranked voting system, so you vote 1, 2, 3, 4 until you can't be bothered voting anymore. The advice of this blog is always do not vote for people in STV elections that you do not want elected. Your vote, this vote. People didn't even understand vote till you book would meant that you stopped when you started to book. It didn't mean vote and book and keep going and ride it through. Don't vote for people in general. In no election should you vote for people you do not want to be elected. So don't do that. If you're in the SNP, do not go in there and say, "Oh, I kept voting because." No, stop when you don't like the candidate. That's the game. The nomination closes 77 days, which is very arbitrary, but 77 days from the opening of nominations, which was confirmed to be today, which means that nominations will close on the 3rd of May. The 3rd of May. So I think we said May the 4th be with you.
Yeah, we did.
Had a very Star Wars.
May the 4th, you will have a list announced.
And this is where the first compressible element, I think, comes in. So a ballot will be, the 77 days is so that you can go and get your 100 members and your 20 branches. And to get the branches to select you, to get the 77 members, conceivably you've got to go and become a well-known or well-liked individual. The ballot is then sent out, and it says the ballot will be sent out 35 days after nomination close. I think it'll be much quicker if there are less candidates.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's not really... in the 77 days, candidates will get a flare for whether or not they are, suitable for the post. And they don't slim it down at all. So there could be 50 candidates, there could be 2 candidates, there could be a single candidate. It's perfectly reasonable that in the 77 days, everyone bar one candidate struggles to get 100 members and 20 branches, in which case the bloody thing's done in about a minute.
In context,
that'll be the 7th of June.
Yeah. In context, the recent NEC elections have had lots of open posts that people have not actually filled.
Yeah.
So they've not even had enough candidates for the posts. So this will be a real test of the SNP membership's appetite for engagement and appetite for change. Because the one that had a big turnout was the one that I was involved in 2020. That there was a big surge in votes and it was a real competition. In fact, they let everybody through. Everybody met the criteria of the nomination, so everybody went through to the ballot, which I think was the first thing that happened. So, this will be a real interesting time for the SNP as a party. So,
35 days after nomination close, the ballot will be sent out. So you'll get your ballot on the 7th of June. And then you have 21 days, the shortest segment in all this, you have 21 days to vote and return your ballot. and it will be the 28th of June, which, it doesn't actually confirm when the result will come out after that, but I presume that if they know the result on the 28th of June, it closes at 4 p.m. on the 28th of June. So, reasonably, it's not going to take long, because 99% of members will vote via the online voting platform, and then there'll be some paper ballots. Who'd assume we'll try and be? Post comes in at 11 o'clock or something. It's not going to take till 4 o'clock. Royal Mail might call a strike, which would be quite funny.
Yeah, I was thinking.
So 28th, they announce the new party leader, and then amusingly, just to really screw things up, Parliament goes on recess on the 1st of July.
Yep. We've got to the 30th of June to vote for a First Minister under that timetable.
Yeah. And they won't like that, because it's the 29th of June. I can check this. 29th of June 2023. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a Friday, and they usually don't sit on the Friday.
I think it's the Thursday. I think the 30th.
Is it?
Friday, yeah. It's the first, I'm pretty sure, is a Saturday.
Yeah, you're right. So the 29th is a Thursday, and then the 30th is and then the 1st is a Saturday, so yeah. So I can't imagine that it's going to be a particularly popular contest there. Anyway, if you missed that and you can't be bothered rewinding, it's actually available on ViveEcosse just now. The National Secretary does have the power to shrink that. We'd have to justify it in some methods, but they have the ability to shrink that and make it a smaller time frame. The second election that will happen is quite separate, and it is for the First Minister of Scotland. Just because you're the SNP party leader, it doesn't actually mean you're by default the First Minister of Scotland. It does actually mean you have to get scrutinised by the MSPs in Parliament. Someone has to propose you have to get put through. The other parties will undoubtedly put somebody through. Although you only have to win a simple majority, you do in practice kind of have to get 50% plus one, because if you don't get 50% plus one, you have the whole problem that at any point they'll pull your government out of power. So, reasonably, SNP members have no real limit on who they elect. However, there is a problem that the Scottish Parliament must be able to approve the new SNP leader, and you'd either need to do that with the support of the Greens, the Lib Dems, Labour, or the Conservatives. There unfortunately are not enough people to do it yourself. So, oddly, the next First Minister will need to be approved, I presume, by the Greens. So, welcome to a very interesting set of events. Alison, I'm sorry for rambling there.
No, that was really informative. So what that leaves us with is quite an interesting dilemma from the SNP. They've got a few circles to try and square. So if they do this, some may say this is quite a cynical timescale, based on, the Supreme Court, as you mentioned, was back in November. The special conference, which was alluded for the new year, is in the middle of March, and it's to discuss the options. Now, the date of the October 19th has never officially been taken off the table, although they have stood down civil servants, etc. But there's still a lot of people in the movement that think the 19th of October is doable. Now, if you're not going to have a First Minister and a leader until literally right up at recess, if that happens, when do you pass a bill to actually change the date of the election, which needs, a 50% plus one majority to actually change the election date? That would need to go through the Parliament. Who's going to do that during an election contest? Is this, you may say, on one hand, this is to encourage, a continuation of the SNP's anointment of new leaders, which is for me, a bad precedent that was set in the previous handover, or is this going to be a truly democratic event, which I think, regardless of what you think, it will breathe fresh air in where it's been very stagnant for a long time. And I think we need a big breath of democracy to come into the SNP and start to blow through Scotland and the Parliament, because I think across the board people are getting so turned off the whole political setup at the moment. So if you want to show yourself as the party that can actually take independence forward, how do you square that? You know, like, are they going to like put their hands up and say, look, this now cannot be this year, but we should still prioritise getting the mechanism to be able to change the election, to be in control of it in the same way Scotland's Parliament's controlling the franchise now. Because at the moment, the event that Nicola Sturgeon had said as the plebiscite is an election that she doesn't control the franchise or the date of. So if you're leaving that up to your opposition, they're always going to advantage themselves. And, you know, it's happened with Theresa May back the last time when Nicola Sturgeon said she was going to have a referendum. She then pulled a general election. So October 19th could end up being, we don't know, it could end up being a UK general election around that time. It's also not a particularly great time to have an election in Scotland. By the time you get to middle of October, not only are schools on holiday and people are potentially away, and, you know, have they all signed up to, you know, postal votes, etc., which is not a brilliant sign up here, particularly for non-Tories. I know it's got better in recent years, but, you know, it's not the preferable date, I would suggest. The last referendum was in spring, late summer, early spring. Late summer, early autumn. So I would suggest that, yes, or a spring election would be, if you're looking at this just from an independence campaign point of view, would be a preferable time. So I think realistically, there's a lot of things that they need to really come out and show who they are. We talk a lot about written constitutions. You know, anything in a contract can be written, implied, or, you know, verbal. And I think they need to start demonstrating by their actions where they stand, what they stand for, what they won't stand for. And if they really want to get people behind this as a democracy, they need to start showing where the SNP fits in an independence, you know, future for Scotland, rather than the assumption that it's all about them. Because I do think those days are gone, and I don't see there being any appetite for a new leader that people will go, I'm with whoever, I'm with X on the side of a bus. I think those days, I think the Boris Johnson Prime Ministership has scunnered people of, you know, all the personality, no substance and policy. There's a lot of policies, you said before, like GRR, at the moment is, by any prism definition, is an absolute bourach. You know, if you're for it, then it's probably unimplementable. If you are against it, it's, you know, why are we spending all this effort on something that I think the latest poll showed 3% of Scotland prioritise, where the top priorities were the NHS, the cost of living crisis and the economy. So if we really want to show that it's a government that represents the people and what the people's imperatives are, then we really need to start opening the doors and start engaging people and listening and bringing people back into the democratic room rather than preaching to them from a podium. And I think these days, you know, what might have worked well in COVID when we were all, you know, like literally a captive audience, and looking for direction from centre, that those days are now past, and I think there will be a lot more appetite for some real change. And there's a big weight on the SNP members' shoulders now to make sure, regardless of who you prefer, and again we're back to the bookies, you know, who's the runners and riders and stuff. I think there's a much bigger conversation to be had around policy, to get away from just, are we just looking at, you know, a new bum on the seat, rather than what does this mean? Who are this is a good opportunity for the SNP to have a retrospective on who they are, what they stand for, what their position is, where they fit, where others fit in this independence movement, and, you know, beyond that in Scotland. I mean, the people who will not vote for independence, but, you know, still have to, you know, get behind, you know, a cohesive, you know, government and a democratic structure and feel safe there. So I think a constitutional convention we've talked about a lot. I think this is a prime opportunity to actually, you know, take this beyond just, you know, party politics and start to open this up to the wider Scotland. That is, for me, the utter imperative. If you support independence, whatever happens, everything you do must be looking at this through getting that on the front page, that on, you know, people's conversation at dinner tables. You know, whether you're talking about the cost of living crisis, whether you're talking about, you know, the NHS, the future and the security of the NHS and our economy in the short term, but imperatively in the medium to long term, you know, what does independence offer an opportunity there compared to the brick wall of devolution just now, or potentially the unpicking of that by some of the actions from a fairly hostile, you know, Westminster government? And we don't know who the next government is going to be in Westminster, and we don't control it, and we will literally be passengers watching that event. So everything that happens in the next few months, I think, is really going to put the spotlight on politicians to start stepping up and giving a real prospectus of what we need to do, and listening to people as well as talking at them. So it could be a time of any kind of change is always a bit uncomfortable for some people, but it's also an opportunity. And I think if people grasp this as an opportunity, that you don't make omelettes without breaking eggs. You know, sometimes we've talked before about can old faces make new cases? Well, one of the old faces is now leaving exit stage left. I think that might be quite a lesson for a few people involved to say, you know, is this now time to see some fresh thinking and in a wider team rather than this personality politics that's dominated Scottish politics for too long?
Well, that's a good point, because we've been, you know, we've had Nicola Sturgeon, we've had Alex Salmond, both very long term, and certainly there's an argument that sorry?
I said both big, strong personalities as well.
Yeah, both very large, you know, personalities, and both large players, and you know, they've each had their respective times, and they've both. I mean, to Nicola Sturgeon's credit, she did win a good few elections. She was capable of winning elections. She just wasn't capable of implementing the manifesto behind the election, which I think was the big issue. We've now got a situation where the SNP's always been hostile to developing talent, and any emerging talent must be quashed or set aside, or made sure it couldn't challenge the First Minister, and that's been prevalent for a good little while. And there's no obvious, you know, challenger, and you know, there's a good number of people that are going to put themselves forward for this, and you know, I think the BBC were running some ridiculous document, and you know, so I think they've got some up there just now. So they've got John Swinney in 2014, and I'm pretty sure much more recently said that categorically not, you couldn't drag me into the job, I'm not doing that job, let's not talk about it. Then we've got Kate Forbes, who I think is a realistic candidate. I would think that Kate Forbes will be quite a strong candidate in it. We've got Angus Robertson, who I'm fairly certain we will see as a candidate. I don't think he'd be any good as a candidate for it. Well, he might be a good, alright candidate. He wouldn't be. I don't think he'd be a great First Minister, to be totally honest. We've got Hamza Yousaf, who again, I'm not entirely convinced we'll see him put himself forward, but he is a man who has an awful lot of self-charm to himself, so I could see him wanting to. Again, is that why he settled his nursery case and everything? Get out of that, get out of any trouble. You know, how long has this been brewing?
Yeah, I thought that at the time. Actually, I thought, is this cleaning house before something happens? Which is why I
want legal troubles.
Yeah.
You know. And then we come on, and they've got Joanna Cherry, who again I think is another strong candidate. There's a lot of people say Joanna Cherry can't because she's an MP rather than MSP. There's nothing in the party rules that forbid an MP from being party leader. Then we've got Stephen Flynn, who ruled himself out today and said he's not interested in the job, so we're not going to see him. And then they've randomly got Mary McCallan in there, and you know, I don't mean to be. Mary McCallan, unfortunately, has. Mary McCallan's talent is rather that she's Nicola Sturgeon's pal.
Yeah, I was surprised 3% who Mary McCallan was, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I don't think they would. I think there's the one that the Herald are running with is they think Ash Regan is the next one, and they think that would be kind of. I think the comment was that's the Joanna Cherry light of the. You know, she's Joanna Cherry light. I think they called her, which would make sense because then you'd have a very strong power dynamic between, you know, Joanna Cherry in Westminster, and then you'd have Ash Regan as possibly the First Minister in Scotland. Again, I'm not entirely sure if that's the combination that will win out, but it is the one that have come forward. I think there will be at least one or two other, you know, horses in the race, and I think they will avail themselves quite quickly because getting that 100 members is quite difficult. And I think the other point that I think we wanted to cover, and I know me and you spoke about this early on, was that in this situation it possibly would be a good time to have a look. Do you want to have the First Minister also being the party leader, and do you want the party leader have, you know, because you've got the scope to have the Scottish Parliamentary party leader, you've got the scope to have the Westminster party leader, and then you've got the scope to have the actual party leader who would be free to work on things such as independence without necessarily being beholden to the politics of the Scottish Parliament of any given day, which, you know, the SNP haven't exactly got the cleanest record on right now.
So I think Keith Brown was originally touted for that as when he got the deputy. He was originally, you know, he was relieved of his ministerial post, and previous to having a new one back with Justice Minister. But that was supposed to be to focus on independence, and obviously nothing actually happened. So I think SNP have kind of danced around the idea of this, but to take it seriously, you know, it is a new way of looking at it, to say, do you play more as a team to cover more of the pitch rather than having everything through this central, you know, control structure? And I think the thing that's made that even more prevalent in, you know, Nicola Sturgeons' First Ministership is the fact her husband's a CEO. So the business, you know, side of the party, everything comes through the one address, which is a very odd situation that's, you know, been spoken about over a number of years, but different people almost just accept it as, well, that's the way it is. But, you know, this has clearly caused a lot of problems. So is the opposite of that to say, well, actually have a wider spread of talent? Like I said before, for you know, one of the things in chemical reactions is to have a bigger surface area. So cover more ground, have smaller particles on a bigger surface area. So instead of one solid mass of power, actually disperse the power over different areas and let them focus deeper into the areas that they're covering. So have a very strong team at Westminster. You've actually got, you mentioned Joanna Cherry, you've got Joanna Cherry in a very, you know, eminent position as the chair of the Joint Commission on Human Rights. That's a very international looking body as well. It's cross-party. So everything you look at from Scotland's future negotiation for an independent Scotland will rely very much on people who can build consensus and come to very strong agreements. And I think that experience is invaluable, and also the kind of respect and credibility there. So you really need to look at not just who's your favourite, and I would really implore people to stop looking at it like this, who's your favourite, or who do you think is the personality, and look at what do they offer, and where are their talents best, you know, fitted. Because, you know, I agree with about Humza. I did think that when I saw it at the time. I thought, is this an imminent, you know, change of leadership? When I saw that come out, and then nothing kind of happened. But obviously it wasn't that long ago. You know, the settlement with the nursery, it all kind of went quiet after being on the front pages, which I think was quite cynically just when his wife was up for kind of a nomination for election for council, I think. So it's a good way of getting, you say there's no such thing as bad publicity, you know, like to get on the front page. And because one of the big problems people have got, unless you're a known face, you're at a disadvantage, because a lot of people just vote for people they know, they've heard of, and it's even if you're not a massive fan, it's the known versus the unknown. So I think, like the Mary McCallan thing, I thought the same thing. I thought, do 3% of people even know who Mary McCallan is? If you weren't that involved with the kind of political scene, she's a minister, I think, but she's only been in one term. I mean, she's only, you know, which is quite unusual. So usually you've kind of got to come in and, you know, prove your worth, if you like. But This whole connected thing really needs to stop. It needs to get back to being a meritocracy, if you like, in the Parliament, because I think across the board, including, or in fact more particularly the opposition, has been very, diluted of talent. And I think, Nicola has won successive elections, but really up against what opposition? The independence card has got over the line when there's really been not a huge alternative, for people to cast those votes that made people surge into the SNP in 2015. So, I think more testing times make people step up their game. And I think that's what's absolutely needed now. People need to start stepping up and saying, if we're serious about independence, we actually need to build a team that can be serious about independence and not just talk the talk, but actually walk the walk and start making real inroads across the whole pitch, not just in one area. There's been a lot of focus on mechanism, a lot of focus on, the Supreme Court thing with no backup of, no seemingly, thought process into the different outcomes. And we put a lot of stuff on our blog about this on ViveEcosse, about the potential outcomes and likelihoods and stuff, and I'm thinking, we did that in 1 hour or so. Surely to goodness, with a staff, like the SNP have got, and the bodies that they've got in there, that they've gamed this out of. We took this preemptive action and didn't consider any potential negative outcomes, even though the positive outcome was the outlier in all the potential events. So we really need to get back to, and I hope we can play our part there in trying to bring more of the kind of strategists into the picture. There's a lot of talent across Scotland, and we need to start giving that talent an outlet. And this is not people that want to be in politics per se, but people who really are passionate about the future of Scotland and who want to see things done in a way that's not through particularly a partisan kind of framing, but really look at, okay, what part does everybody play, whether a politician or grassroots or civic society or people who don't support independence, what part do we all have in the future of Scotland? And I think that's something that we need to start getting. I put quite a lot on Twitter, a kind of hashtag raise the bar, because we really do. I mean, the Westminster government is bar so low. I often say, you couldn't get under it if you're a limbo dancer. But, in Scotland, we've kept above that bar, but it's so low and going lower all the time that, we should not be tracking ourselves against such a low standard. We should be tracking ourselves against the best in the world, not, our neighbours who are really taking democracy to hell in a handcart at the moment. So we really need to start to look beyond this and become more aspirational and ambitious for Scotland's future. And that takes all the talent, even people, almost particularly people you don't agree with. Because if you don't agree with someone and you can have a robust, respectful debate, you will get to a better consensus. The 2007 Parliament, I think, was the exemplar Parliament in Scotland. Yeah. And if we could get back to that kind of place and that kind of politics, I think it would benefit all of Scotland, because it would start to become policy solution focused rather than soundbite and chuck it over the wall at some other poor sap to have to work out how to implement, which is why we've got so much legislation sitting on a shelf or been struck down in courts, rather than actually benefiting solving the problem they set out to solve. Because I think sometimes they just forget what they're actually even trying to solve, even if they kind of thought about it in the first place. So before we get into the deposit return scheme, which is a good kind of example of dealing with garbage, if you like, I think to finish, we need to raise the bar. It's essential. And if we don't do it now, then when do we do it? This is a catalyst. This is a change. This is an opportunity for change, and we need to grab it with both hands.
I think you've brought up DRS there for the deposit return scheme, which is the current the big controversy just now, because effectively they've managed to come up with a deposit return scheme that business is kind of looking at, and they're not even looking at it and saying we don't do this. They're looking at it and they're like, is there a stupider way you could have come up with it, like prepayments and waiting on refunds and paying up front because of course the state needs you to do that, and there's a lot in it. Now, one of the great things that I always enjoyed about the DRS scheme was it's like a defence that isn't a defence, and they're like, and you've heard ministers, you've heard the First Minister, you've heard many people say the same thing, which is, oh, this is in place all over Europe, and actually it's very successful, and we should bash on because actually this is the best way forward. And do you think Scotland uniquely couldn't do it? Which is interesting because it presupposes that deposit return schemes are successful entities, and it's not that they can't be. There's certainly the ability of a DRS to be successful. The policy aims are not, they're not unlike. They're things that we can be in support of. Less dependence on certain packaging, and certainly recyclability where we don't have that where we can't get away from that dependence on packaging. However, it's interesting to note. So the EU, or rather the EEA, the European Economic Area, had a look at this, and there's many countries that were very successful. And this is possibly some of these countries will have moved either forward or backwards now. But interestingly, there were only, when the data was taken, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There were only 6 mandatory deposit return schemes. And what was quite interesting is the 6 that were in there. There were actually countries that do not have mandatory DRS and don't have a fee or anything. And you found out that without the fee, there were certain countries at the time when it was taken, so Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Cyprus, Poland, all had very high recovery and recycling rates anyway, and that was without implying a fee. The second thing you've got there is that certain countries, such as like Estonia and such, had the fee but weren't very good at it. It actually had a worse than average. In fact, Estonia at the time had a worse recovery rate than the UK did at that moment in time, while having a fee. So you can look at these things and assume they're going to be successful and they're uncontroversial, but the truth is we've managed to screw up what should have been a fairly simple, innocuous, non-controversial piece of legislation. But there's a pattern here, and this pattern is endemic of possibly why Nicola Sturgeons out. And it comes from up and down the hill on independence. So the independent supporters had no reason to support Nicola Sturgeon. We then move on to the gender recognition reform, which, it's not something I get particularly heated up about, but it's something that I know has annoyed more women than any other policy that's ever been brought before the Scottish Parliament. And there's the one that, if somebody's going to scoff and say, oh, have you seen that Nicola Sturgeon? That's the policy that they wheel out to tell me that she's done badly. So we get that. We've then got this. I don't know if you can say any more on this. I've just realised I'm going to walk into dangerous territory here, but we've then got £600,000 donated to the SNP for an independence fighting fund that then, goes missing or isn't immediately available. Colin Beattie assures us it's woven through if you look and squint hard enough. But the police are actually investigating that, and I can see you sort of squirming away on the chair there. Can you give any more light on that, or is it a...
I mean, it is a live police investigation, so
So you can't comment.
But there's a lot of things. There's definitely a lot of pressures, which comes back down to the, creating single points of failure and putting too much.
Well, so Alison, I'm going to press you on this a little bit. So you can't answer that question. So there's a live police investigation. So Alison can't comment. Alison, could you give me just out of curiosity here what your position was on the NEC and what group you were on before you got turfed out?
So I was the co-rep for Mid Scotland and Fife with Roger Mullen, ex-MP, and I was also asked to be on the Finance and Audit Committee.
No, no, there's a hilarious circumstance where now that's where we're going to move swiftly on, because Alison will not be able to comment, I'm guessing. We don't pre-record, we don't pre-tempt these things. I just realised we stumbled into it. However, we had another after your time on the FAC, after your time there, we had Peter Murrell. He gave. Was it 106, £107,000 to the party?
Yeah.
Nicola Sturgeons famously questioned on TV, "What do you think about this?" And she said, "Oh, that's Peter's resources. I know nothing about it." So I don't think that was terribly true either, because Nicola Sturgeon is the party leader. She's on the NEC, or we try to say the party now takes £107,000 donations from its chief executive. Nobody checks it out. And again, Alison's going to say, dear listener, that she can't comment because reasons, but it's a bit incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what I will say, because I was not on the FAC or the NEC at that time, but
No.
there is Treasurer's reports and stuff. You would imagine that would have been part of the Treasurer's report to the NEC. The NEC is the board of director of the party and decision-making body, and also it directs the staff, in theory. So
we also have...
the NEC, surely that would have been brought up in minutes, I would think.
Well, this is again like the inquiry into the complaints against Alex Salmond, where we found out that the First Minister, well, in this case the roles were reversed. Alex Salmond had met with Nicola Sturgeon in her house, and Peter, the chief executive of the SNP, was apparently making tea and biscuits in the other room and never bothered to ask what the meeting might have been about.
Yeah, I think this is again what comes into this dual role of, husband and wife, which in some ways will say, well, I don't know how people's personal finances are split, but then you look at it through the prism of the CEO and the leader of the party. Not just First Minister, but the leader of the party, which is the leader of the NEC, which is the board of directors who direct the staff, which includes the CEO. So that at that point, that relationship, if that wasn't a married couple, there would be no question of that. The party, the head of the NEC, all of the NEC actually should be aware of that. So that's a bit that just really didn't kind of gel with me as to why the NEC wouldn't be informed of that, or if they were informed of that, what position did they take on it, given that we had obviously left, and we got quite, I would say, treated pretty disrespectfully, from some people in the media, and there was a lot of people in the party, like Nicola Sturgeon, John Spinney, I think Peter Shirton, whatever, that went to press to say there was nothing there, nothing to see, da da da. And I do think that the NEC need to probably step up and make a statement, I would suggest, on that.
I would say as well, this was something that was passed to us today, actually, that because at the time, Douglas Chapman had successfully been elected to the NEC as treasurer of the party. And then Douglas Chapman, there was obviously the resignation of the three people on the FAC. There was the resignation then of Douglas Chapman as the treasurer of the party, and he at the time said that he didn't have access to the resources required to do the job effectively. And then there was a period of time, which was about a week maybe, where they kind of went round the houses and got Colin Beattie back to be the treasurer at that point. This is an interesting question. Who was the treasurer? Because it's mandated that someone is the treasurer.
You have to have a treasurer.
Between the departure... Sorry?
You do have to have a treasurer, yeah.
Well, that's what I was thinking. It's a core role that is required. You need you need your ops, you need your treasurer, you need your secretary. That's in there. So... Douglas Chapman departs, Colin Beattie's in, there's a week there. Who has overall responsibility at that point? And I think the answer we're going to find is probably Nicola Sturgeon.
The head of the NEC. I think you're right. I think it was for probably less than a week. But it wasn't an immediate... Certainly a lot of the posts, because before I left the NEC, there was other people had left, and there was vacant posts that sat vacant, and then I believe they filled our post pretty quickly. But that has to be done through, going through the previous election, and because it's STV, who was next, and working at quorums and everything. So there would have been a period of time administratively that there would have been a vacant treasurer post, which there can't be. So I think the backstop is the leader, who is the leader of the NEC.
So we're then with the conundrum that we have, Nicola Sturgeon has presided over the independence crisis, let's call it that, the Supreme Court defeat, the GRR, which is not popular, although she says she wasn't involved, there was the whole Salmond inquiry that waylaid it. I'm not particularly sold on this whole she done the best with COVID, and I think she came out and she gave a very good briefing each day, and it was really good to see the leader of the country sort of come out and do that. However, was the handling of COVID so significantly better? Because the NHS is currently paying the price of it. The vaccination rate's basically the same, if not worse, than the average in Europe. It's not, I wouldn't say that COVID was handled, if you look retrospectively, in any great way that has. She might have been more friendly and more communicative than many, but the actual handling is by the by. And then we move on to the elevation of the junior members of the Parliament to become, better at their jobs to get in there. We've seen a great sort of split in the SNP that wasn't there under Salmond, and Salmond certainly didn't leave and create the split. The big splits in the SNP were caused after him in pursuit of some policy goals that perhaps were not best put forward and had lost focus and independence. And that kind of takes us to where we're at. That there were so many things. There are so many swimming things in that sea that were pelting that little boat that just put that many holes in it that it couldn't float. And I do wonder, I was the campaign manager at Shirley Ann Somerville, and I remember saying to her, back when she used to, acknowledge I existed in the room that I was in, we had a situation where it was very much, you're going, what is this? You need to refocus on the actual manifesto, not these side projects that you've all invented. You need to stop being beholden to, the SNP youth that have random ideas that they come up with and chase until they ruin everything that is working in the SNP. So, we spoke about that, and, I was told basically to get back in my lane. Nicola Sturgeons is the smartest, brightest, greatest person that's ever lived, so, how dare you be quiet? So I did at the time, but I don't think I was that quiet. I just wasn't welcome in the room anymore. And it comes to, I joined Alba and tried that, but Alba's got a fair number of riotous people in it that just cause trouble every day. And that leads us to where we're at now, which is that, fundamentally nobody was wrong back then when we said Nicola Sturgeon's focused on the wrong things. The SNP is a very powerful party in politics in Europe. If it's still solvent and still has some money, which again nobody actually knows, because despite it being clear as day, nobody can actually tell you if the SNP has money, because the actions of the chief executive having to delve into his own secret resources hidden from his wife, who is the first minister, to prop the party up, seem to be in controversy and solid solvency. There aren't many companies that run on the basis of, hang on, the chief exec's going to rummage down the sofa and hopefully come up with £107,000 to keep us going. And that leads us to, they have a lot of data. The SNP have a lot of canvas data. Activate might be an old system, but the data in it is still, you can still tell if somebody they supported independence at certain points. There's targetable data still in Activate. I don't see them using it ever. They've not done that. And then the nearest one to them is Alba, who are a marketing machine, and they do their marketing, and they've got the policy, and they've got they've got that going for them. And I think that's the problem. I find Alba generate the better policy base, but then it seems to be like all the good policy that comes out of the Alba party then goes into a meat grinder with people who just you can't be bothered listening to. But they have no data. They have no data system. So how do you bring, does the next leader of the SNP have to bring these factions together? And is this the return of the supermajority, which was, probably a great strategy? The supermajority was the strategy, but how do you now settle the campaign back towards independence? But how do we re-sow division here?
So the supermajority was the kind of battleship strategy that the SNP turned their guns on, to actually think their own battleship. If the battleship was independence, supermajority was the way to secure that. The independence movement would then be running the parliament. Everything. I think you've said it before. Everything could have been done through the prism of independence. It would have been not. They could have. Don't get me wrong. There would still have been unionists in the parliament, but you would have had the control of that parliament in a way that the Tories have got an 80-seat majority in Westminster, so can really do what they like. And it always kind of struck me why we didn't play that game in the environment that we could actually win on. So that's bizarre. I've got to say, I couldn't name any Alba policies. You're saying Alba's favourite?
Yeah. So, the ones that I enjoy anyway is the Alba Party are certainly pro-Republican in the sense of they want to get rid of the monarchy, which I think is a perfectly reasonable policy.
Because Alex Salmond's not a Republican, so I find a lot of this
that's what I mean.
Doesn't really gel.
The policy, it is their stated policy that the Alba Party, which I'm dragging up in front of me just now, is the idea that there be no republic. I don't know if they're pro-republican or just the fact they're very anti-monarchy. I like to know. I like that.
Can we just take it from there? So let's go for one at a time. So that Republican policy is a policy not to confuse with independence. This is another thing that is a predeterminant that the SNP have got into. We're going to be independent in Europe, in the EU. And it's like, well, hang on. Yeah. Independence is supposed to be self-determination. It either is or it isn't. If you start loading it with we're for this or we're for that, you start to dilute your audience base. If we're really looking at Scotland and trying to bring as many people on board, including people who won't naturally be independence supporters but are so scunnered with the system down in Westminster and could possibly see a better future for them as a traditional Tory in Scotland, in an independent Scotland, because they're not dyed-in-the-wool unionists. It's more their kind of conservative values or whatever, or Labour values. To be fair, you are correct. Policy.
Sorry?
It's a distraction policy. It's the same as the SNP distraction policies.
It's a shiny policy that drags people like me, political weirdos, in. I like that. I like the whole elected head of state.
You'll vote for independence anyway.
That's true. That's true. So
the cake.
They've got a 5-point plan to tackle child and family poverty. They've got a Scotland and Europe policy that's effectively, look, we'd love to be in the EU, but it's going to be difficult. Let's go for EFTA. There's a lot in there that I sometimes feel the Alba Party have much more. I mean, EFTA allows you to have the single market. It allows you to have the common travel area with the UK and have the goods with the UK, but then still meet the European standard to export there. Certain things like EFTA make a lot more sense than being in the EU, at least initially. I'm ambivalent if we go back in, we stay out.
I'm actually very pro looking at EFTA, because I think EFTA, for me, a lot of people again who are the target audience that maybe wouldn't, independence would put them off, but if you say single market access, that suddenly becomes something. What's the quickest way to get back to single market? But I do still think this needs to be future neutral democratic options. For me, where we're missing is people given choice. Scotland have such a lack of choice at the moment. There's so many people I know. See if you could vote for a party that said politically homeless they would win it at the park. Because the amount of people I know that are actively involved in politics that feel really homeless just now, that don't want to just do, more of the same but in a smaller scale. They want to do something they want to see something fresh and different. And what that is, I don't know. But I think we've got an opportunity now to start actually exploring that. And I think we'll find that what kept the SNP disciplined was self-discipline before, because they were very behind a very consensus policy for independence. And I think in the 8 years, nearly 9 years, that's disappeared. I think day one, the 2015 election should have been the massive catalyst for independence, and it was a massive catalyst for the SNP. And I think that was what... I think in hindsight, if we could learn something, we should not have all joined the SNP in 2015, because that is actually what made them comfortable. And actually it's better to keep a political party hungry for your vote than think it's in the bag, because they then become complacent and lazy and then start to look for other things. And if you are pulling the independence card security blanket out the bag every election to get you, because people have got no choice if they want to vote for independence, then you actually don't have to really kick the tyres of your policy to make sure you can sell it to the electorate. The GRR has never been discussed in detail at conference. Self-ID has never been in a manifesto, and yet this is the thing that's ripping, the Scottish Government's credibility from under it at the moment. Which, if that had to be sold, they would. It's a bit like a business case. If that had to be sold to the party, to the membership, and sold, on an electoral ticket, and I mean on the side of a bus and not on page 43 in small font or whatever, then, they would soon have realised this was not a vote winner. If you'd taken the pulse of the polling, you would have seen it's not a vote winner. So, you've really got to say, if the lessons learned for politics is to start to listen to the electorate and stop trying to preach to them.
Well, there's only been a week between Nicola Sturgeons saying anybody who didn't agree with her might as well be a homophobe or a racist.
Oh, yeah.
And Nicola Sturgeons
time to be alive in politics, what a tone to set. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of it today has been about, I think I said to you just before we came on that somebody has usefully gone through the speech today and said, I think there was 153 mentions of I, me or my, and 11 mentions of Scotland. So I would like to see that change, and I would like to see whoever is putting themselves forward to be bold, to be brave, to be fresh, to be ambitious for Scotland, and to not think it's all down to them, but to build, to come to the table with a team approach that puts Scotland and the people of Scotland on the front page. Mention Scotland 153 times, not yourself. We should all be bit players in building this jigsaw of a better Scotland. Because if we don't do that, what on earth is it all about? Is it just about keeping people in careers in politics? To go round and round the roundabout, with a nil-sum, outcome. So hopefully we do see things that start to change, because I don't think this personality politics road has got much appetite left amongst people, because people are facing massive challenges day in, day out in a ridiculously energy-rich Scotland, that we are constantly asked to compromise down in everything that we do, where we should be pushing up, we should be pushing upwards, we should be setting tone internationally. We really do need to remember who we are as an enlightened Scotland that debate robustly. We look at evidence-based, approaches to things. We don't just say, why does our deposit? But why are you all shouting our depositors? Because all these other countries do it. What does that even mean? Let's look at Scotland's solution. Let's look at, is the problem about littering or is the problem about the environment? Because if the problem is about littering, stop cutting back on council staff. Start to empty and maintain bins. Rural areas are a holy nightmare. And actually start to look at localised solutions that are not central belt solutions to everybody. And then if it's actually about the environment, you said before, look at, pressurised industry. Put pressure on industry, particularly the big polluters like Coca-Cola, to actually come up with, breakthrough, technologies. I know, your kind of organisation has done lots of stuff. They're getting rid of plastic straws and plastic cutlery and people are moving to compostable packaging and stuff. Pressurise the plastics industry to actually get rid of the consumption of plastic in the way that it is. Force technology change the way it happens if you put people's feet to the fire on things, and actually resolve that problem rather than just coming up with a convoluted way that, as usual, the people who are least able to afford it will lose out, and it'll be small businesses and it'll be consumers in rural areas who can't get their bottles because they've got their accessibility issues and stuff. You've got loads of SMEs that have got massive potential in Scotland. Speak to business and actually work out a business solution. Don't just say, we'll come up with a solution here and we'll chuck it to industry to implement. I mean, come on, that's not good enough.
It leads us on to, big solutions are required, and certainly I was laughing because the news today was looking at who would win out of this. So they seem to suggest the Labour Party were going to be the main beneficiaries of Nicola Sturgeons' step back, which I find hilarious, because actually the Labour Party couldn't come at a worse time, because there are not a bunch of more talentless people in any one group in the whole of Scotland. So I mean, the Labour Party lack any talent. They're not going to be able to. The SNP, the fun thing about the SNP is when they're under attack in a campaign, when they're really in a campaign, which this will be, they're actually very good. They navigate things very well. Under pressure, they can hold message, they can distribute resources. By the way, there's been a lot of branches, but an awful lot of Nicola Sturgeon nonsense they've got to get rid of. There's a problem with putting Nicola Sturgeon on literally every leaflet and ruler that you use, is the fact that, there she goes. So, you've got the winners here are certainly
and stuff as well that they probably had to get rid of, because they campaigned based on Boris Johnson being in until he decided to go.
Exactly. So they've lost the Boris stuff, and then, by the way, that might be why they needed the loan. There's no Nicola Sturgeon and there's no Boris Johnson to chase. So the Labour Party are certainly not the winners here. The Conservatives, again, while slightly more talented than their Labour brethren, are not any better. The Greens, I mean, if I was Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater, I'd be very worried today, because I don't think there's many people that will go, there's a talented pair we should keep around. I mean, Lorna Slater has been a disaster, an absolute disaster. Patrick Harvey has been invisible.
Yeah, I would agree.
Lorna Slater has been a disaster. And we're now in a situation where Labour Party ain't going to win out of this. The Lib Dems are going to lose. I mean, Alex Cole-Hamilton bores the tears out of me whenever that man speaks. He flip-flops and everything. He has no opinion that it particularly forwards any, case.
Labour and Lib
so
Dems
democratically,
implicit on the whole thing with the GRR Brewdach as well. That
Labour
actually put through some bold amendments, got them voted down, and voted for it anyway. So what kind of government would that suggest? That you stand on principle and then just fold? And I think Alex Cole-Hamilton's personal vote, which is actually one of the highest votes I think in the country, he's in quite a precarious position. There's a few things in social media and stuff just now that I think he's kind of associated himself to some interesting characters, so that could all play out as well. I mean, I want to say one thing about Labour. Labour got straight in with a party political broadcast tonight, which must have been booked, but it seems interesting timing, because I just happened to be, at a TV, and I noticed that it was all Anna Sarwar. So they're obviously going for the Nicola Sturgeon approach of it's all about me, and I think whoever clocks on first to doing it differently may be the big winner in this, because I think people are generally scunnered with all the personalities that are being dished up to them at the moment.
I think you're probably right. What else do we have to cover, or are we just going to leave it as a Nicola Sturgeon and Succession off episode tonight?
The only thing I think we've not covered, just to kind of mention briefly, is this special conference, and now whether this actually happens or how that happens, and what options it's actually leaving the members. Because with the timetable that you set out, unless the NEC change it quite dramatically, and whether they're allowed to do that out with conference, which is a bit of a kind of catch-22. How do you get permission without going to conference? Blah blah. But that's really going to limit what they can do realistically in timescales. But I would suggest that the arbitrary date of the October 11th, 23 is just that. And what you want to do is, start getting all the mechanisms in motion and things working to get independence on the front page, in people's minds, start to look at solutions, start to get people to start thinking the way they were in 2013 and 14 about the potential and the possibility of Scotland, and how we can actually get communities and individuals and groups of people really starting to think and come up with really innovative solutions that work for them, work for their communities, because that was the absolute bonus of the independence referendum. It actually made people truly think they could change things. And I think the SNP, sadly, from 2015 started just peddling hope like snake oil with nothing behind it, where actually in 2013-14 the grassroots were actually not just thinking about hope, they were feeling it. It felt real. And unless independence feels tangible and relevant to people's lives, it's not going to happen. So, you can have as many mechanisms in elections as you want, but it needs to be something that's actually going to take Scotland to and beyond independence. And that's where we all need to start thinking now, in my humble opinion.
I think that's a very good place to leave it. And I think that sums up our position, and to leave on a positive note, I suppose, Nicola Sturgeon had been criticised for not, taking people at the hill and marching them down the other side again, and certainly not making any progress on the mission of independence. And I think that we've previously said that there are too many old faces, and that they are slowing us down, the same old faces. And actually now we don't have Nicola Sturgeon or Alex Salmond in a position of particular power now, and I think it is time for the fresh faces to come forward, for the leadership contenders to move forward and to present a new idea, a new case, a new dawn to the darkness. And hopefully with today's news, this is another boost to the cause, which is already, it sits 50-50 on average over the trailing year or two. And I think that we're in a good place. The right momentum, the right leader could absolutely take this forward and win it in the very near future. The greatest scam that's ever been successful is the union has managed to peddle the idea that the poverty and the economic experience being felt in the UK just now is somehow normal, expected, and isn't something we could do better than by ourselves. And that is the real tragedy, because we're worrying about things like DRS schemes and we're worrying about this sort of thing, rather than focusing on the key thing, that we have the economic levers, the economic drivers to propel our country forward and seriously take forward the case for independence, a much stronger economy, a much more equitable, just and fair society where the NHS is not in crisis because it can't afford more money, where teachers don't need to strike because they need more money, where we don't need to be in this repetitive cycle of 1%, 2% public pay rises, where we should be hitting 5% every year because the economy is that far out in front of us. And that, I think, is a good place for us to stop, because someone new should be along soon, and I'm really interested to hear the debate. I'm not a member of the SNP, I know you're not either. We're both politically homeless at this moment in time, but it's going to be interesting to see perhaps there's a place for us and for the future of Scottish independence.
There has to be a place for everybody, and I would just say we need to raise the bar across politics, across aspirations, across the country, across ambition. And I think we need to stop settling, as you've said, for that this is inevitable, and start looking at what we can do and start feeling empowered that we can actually change things. Well, on that note, you've been listening or watching to the ViveEcosse podcast
on this very special episode regarding the news of Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeons, stepping down from post and opening the door to a successor in the Scottish Parliament. I've been Graeme.
I've been Alison. Good night.
Good night and goodbye.
Good night and good luck.